my heart's just pounding from the comments I've heard. Why do politicians feel that they need to keep taxing or changing the rules for how to claim our legitimate business expenses? Owning property is a business and takes time and effort to make sure all is running smoothly. I'm just so angry that as a landlord, I shouldn't have to feel guilty about owning property or properties in our case. Why does it appear that all landlords are demonised and put in the same bracket?
Max?
Look, our political focus is on both major parties' failures to phase out those tax handouts for property investors. We have had a tax system that has encouraged people to buy up property investments and then able to write off any losses they make on that investment off on their tax. And look, I'm sorry, I just don't think that's fair. And the human consequences of a tax system and a rental system where a landlord can put up the rent by as much as they want at the end of every lease. Like, we desperately need caps on rent increases right now because the human consequences of that are the people I've spoken to. Single mums choosing between buying their baby's nappy rash cream or paying the rent. People living on the street, families out of their... Well,
but isn't it the case that actually interest rates have risen as well, that some landlords actually are in significant financial trouble as well?
The worst consequences for that is selling an investment property and making a huge capital gains. I'm sorry, but I just think... can we just get real for a second here? 30% of this country rents, and right now, just like federal parliament, there's more Andrews than renters on this panel, and I think that really the voices of renters continually get silenced because the interests of landlords get put up against renters as if they are equal. But they are not, because if a renter loses their home, they're sleeping in their car on the street. If a property investor has to sell their home, that might be bad, but they still get a huge sale price out of that home. I think we just need a little bit of perspective.
Ann-Maree, I know your experience is very different to that. Who do you feel demonised by?
I feel demonised by the government because they want to take away capital gains tax.
The government hasn't proposed that.
Don't worry, it's only the Greens that want to do that.
Yeah, well, there you go.
The government hasn't proposed it. It's not one of their proposals. In fact, they're saying no to that proposal.
The reason why my husband and I got into investment in property was because we could not see the government always being able to support us in retirement. We're self-funded retirees. We get nothing from the government. We don't get a healthcare card. We will be supporting ourselves. We're saving the government money by not requesting a pension. We're also supplying rental properties to people that do want to rent. Not everyone wants to own their own home. And as for rentals going up, our rents go up according to the market value. Last year when I did my tax return, I compared last year's tax return to the year before's tax return. Our gross rent was up 3%. Our interest payments were double the year before. We are also finding it hard. We have to find the money to pay that interest.
Okay.
So we're in just as much of a...
I want to bring you in, Andrew Leigh. I mean, it isn't a government proposal, but there are a lot of people saying it should be, that you should be looking at some of these concessions. But you've just heard there from Ann-Maree that she obviously feels, well, demonised is the word she used, by some of this discussion. Is that the sensitivity? Is that why you've been reluctant?
Well, Patricia, we've got a pretty full tax reform agenda, multinational tax, closing down debt deduction loopholes, making sure some of the West Coast
no talking points tonight.
No,
yes, you have other things, but on this issue.
And
this is a housing show.
Everyone in the room is getting a tax cut on the 1st of July. So our tax, we have a full dance card
tax bracket in.
when it comes to tax
housing.
I personally don't believe in the politics of us and them, that kind of populist politics that seeks to pit society against one another. Fundamentally, what we want to do is make sure there's a fairer deal for renters. With more people renting for longer, we're working with states and territories to ensure you've got renters' rights. You'll know about some of the detail of this, Ann-Maree, but for many renters, I think they look around the world and they see countries where you can have a pet, where you can put a picture on the wall, and where you've got long-term leases. So we're working with states and territories to ensure that works better. But fundamentally, housing affordability is about supply. If you go back to when I was a kid, we had houses costing about 5 years average income. Now they cost about 12 years average earnings. That increase is fundamentally because the housing supply hasn't kept up with demand. I totally disagree with Max's perspective that Australia has enough houses. We don't. We need to build.
He hasn't said there's enough houses.
I mean, and can I just say, like, part of the problem here is you just actually sort of avoided answering the question, because the question, like, the question's very direct. And you just mentioned other countries around the world and renters' rights. You know what most of continental Europe has? Rental regulation, caps on rent increases. And you can have, look, improvements to renters' rights are important, but as long as a renter, as long as they get to an end of a lease and they can't afford the $200 rent increase, then they're going to get screwed.
All right,
and unless we have a cap on that, we're not going to fix the housing
I want to bring you
crisis.
in, Rose. Do you think we've got the balance right between renters and landlords?
No, I don't. Coming from a state government perspective, Andrew's right. I do look at the rental experience in New South Wales and I think it's inadequate, and I think that's the case in a lot of states. You can't get long enough rental leases. It is too easy to be evicted. You know, renters need more protections against inadequate conditions in their homes. I agree that they should be able to have pets. So no, I mean, I fundamentally don't think, as we see a larger number of people renting and renting for longer, we've got the balance right.
Do you think landlords are being demonised?
Look, I mean, it's really powerful to hear your perspective, I have to say, and I really thank you for sharing it. And it can be hard to come on national TV and talk about, your experiences and the kind of, force of the political rhetoric that you're experiencing. So, sure, of course, I hear what Ann-Maree's saying. I suppose, in response, I'd just ask you, and I'm sure that you do, and actually, most landlords, of course, are people who just are looking for a bit of a nest egg for their retirement. And I respect and acknowledge that and think it plays an important role. But I would ask you just to think about the experience, perhaps not of your tenants, but of other tenants, because the experiences that I've talked about, and even, Max has talked about, are real. And there is a growing number of people who are relying on rentals, and they have kids and they send their kids to school, and they need more stability in the rental experience. So I'd ask you to just think about overall, how can we deliver a system that works for you but also works for them?
We'll keep this discussion going.